All right, ladies and gentlemen, Kuro Games has come out with some news recently, and while it might not be news that's a huge surprise to you, I think that having confirmation on both the attribute and the weapon type of the two newest characters coming in version 2.4 is going to be a great discussion for us to have, specifically when it comes to, if you're going to be pulling these characters and maybe deciding whether or not to actually pull their weapons. I think it's always a great discussion, even when we don't know necessarily what their kits are going to provide. We have like a lot of clues just based off of some missing holes in the roster about what roles they might play across teams. And so I wanted to take the time to discuss all of the different weapon types that are currently in the game for the various options over here. We're going to have Cartethyia and Lupa's official details over here. And so why not take some of that time to actually discuss, based off their attribute of fusion and Broadblade, and arrow and sword. Take some of that time to talk about their options. So with that, the first character up and the first character that's going to be on banner in version 2.4 is, of course, going to be Cartethyia. She is sort of the Sentinel's resonator of the region. And as we're familiar, right, when it comes to a dynamic like that, those are typically some of the strongest characters that are going to release in the region. We've got Jinxie over here kind of representing Jin Joe, and she released in version 1.1 as one of the stronger characters in the game, for certain. And so, knowing that she's a sword and then knowing that she's also arrow, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the options that she's going to have available to her just from the existing choices on the roster. I do believe that I have every single 5-star limited sword in the game, as well as, multiple copies of the standard one. And so with that in mind, I'm going to be real here. Cartethyia is one of those units where I highly recommend you wait a little bit to decide whether or not to pull her weapon. She has one of the best options in the game. This is called Emerald of Genesis. It's the standard 5-star sword. If you don't have a copy of this weapon, you didn't get it from your UL45 box, I highly recommend you do. Because let's just be honest about one thing in particular. This weapon, as a standard sword, is probably one of the best ones in the game because it provides that great 587 base attack, and it also provides a whopping 24.3% crit rate. You'll notice that it actually has a similar identical stat profile to other 5-star signatures that are in the game. This is Camellia's that's popping up on the side. And the great thing about this weapon is that while it doesn't have the same attribute damage effect, like a lot of weapons will have like a baseline bonus of like 12% attack and then a more damaging bonus on top of it, this weapon essentially makes your characters super easy to build in exchange for losing a little bit of damage most of the time. Because what this weapon does is it provides ER, and the more synchronization ranks you get of it, as you sort of like build up, you start spending your standard pulls on the weapon banner, you'll be able to get multiple copies of it, and then that ER effect is actually going to increase as well. And when DPS characters in this game, I think pretty much every single one feels really good and you want at least 120% on them, this weapon by itself can oftentimes just fulfill a character's ER requirements. And what that means is that you just pop this bad boy on, you get like 1 ER substat, or if it's at R3 or above, you don't need any ER substats. And that means that when it comes to your echoes, when it comes to your Sonata sets that you're farming, especially knowing that Gusts of Welkin is a newer set, this just makes the characters so much more simple to build. And when this is a 5-star weapon that also comes with crit rate, only 2 out of the 5 standard 5-star weapons actually do that. I mean, let's be honest here. I think Cartethyia is going to be perfectly fine. I think she's going to clear all the content in the game with this thing. And I highly recommend for every single player, right? Take her into the TOA, take her into Whimpering Waste, take her into all of this different endgame content, the holograms, the cube event, all of that stuff. Maybe when Virtual Crisis comes back, take her into that as well. I don't think it's going to be an issue. This is actually something that I told a lot of Camellia owners back in the day with, don't feel the need to pull Camellia signature if you're already full clearing with Emerald of Genesis. And again, this is just a discussion based off of its base stats and its ER effect alone. We didn't even get into the weapon skill yet, or the second part of the weapon skill. So let's get into that. So the second part of the weapon skill is that when Resonance skill is cast, increase attack by 7.5%, 6 at rank 1, and then that scales as well, up to 2 times, and the effect lasts for 10 seconds. Depending on what Cartethia's Resonance skill cooldown is, it might be shorter than 10 seconds. If it's short enough, she'll be able to fully stack up this effect, and then get a nice little attack buff. 12% isn't massive, and 6% per stack definitely isn't massive either. But if you do have multiple copies, it can get much larger. And at the end of the day, right, that's just extra damage on top. But you're mainly using this weapon for its incredible stat profile. And so I would say being a sword user in this game is one of the biggest buffs a character can have. A sword using DPS is probably the best combination you can look for in a more budget, affordable unit, simply due to the fact that Emerald of Genesis exists in the game. And that's not something you can really say for the other weapon types, and I'll explain why. So when it comes to the other weapon types, and you can imagine Lupa is going to be included in this conversation as well, it's not as simple. Because A, the only other weapon that provides a crit rate stat is going to be Static Mist. And then this is more like a sub DPS weapon as well that doesn't actually buff the on-fielder. Every other standard weapon you're going to have available is just not that great. So we just take a look at the fusion standard weapon, for example. This thing provides an attack secondary stat and then buffs like liberation damage. But when it comes to Lupa and a lot of the speculation that's going on with her kit and the synergy she's supposed to have, this one might actually be better than you think. Depends on her kit and how it works, though. So, yeah, we'll just take a look at some of the other standard weapons, and you'll be able to see over here, right? Like, Abyss Surges, another attack substat, and then a very specific weapon effect that focuses on boosting basic attack and resonant skill damage. It's a lot more tailor-made. It's not as general compared to the 5-star sword, and this means that you can just lose out on all of its buffs and only benefit from its ER, which isn't that great. And then when you look at Cosmic Nipples, yeah, this thing is also just entirely basic attack damage focus, attack substat, and then no other real beneficial effects if your character doesn't use basic attack damage. So you can sort of see, right, why there's such a big gap between the rankings of the standard weapons, and why Static Mist, in my opinion, or Static Mist and Emerald of Genesis just kind of like win out and are on top compared to everything else. So, now that we talked about the standard choice, now let's start getting into some more of the premium options and how they're going to work. We're going to start off with the second free sword that everyone gets just from playing the 2.2 story. I don't think this is going to be very good at all. I think this thing is going to be dog shit. Primarily due to the fact that while it does have a high base attack, it's got an ER secondary stat, and you'll need to provide healing to get a resonant skill damage bonus. I don't think that Cartethyia is going to heal. Maybe she does, but it's pretty clear that she's intended to be used with Arrow Rover, and Arrow Rover is going to be the one doing the healing, and this is the weapon that Arrow Rover uses in their teams. So I don't really think this is going to be anything, and you can't even use the effect because Rover is required to use the secondary effect. So I think this one's just a wash. Don't even think about it. Next up, we'll talk about Camellias. This weapon is actually one of the most unusable in the game for most members of the cast, because at a baseline, unless the character does a shit ton of basic attack damage, which Cartethyia and Fleur-de-Lis, they might, the weapon almost has no effect at all because it buffs basic attack damage, and if they don't do it, it doesn't really matter. And the concerto energy function over here, it can only be used by Camellia. It's a very specific weapon, and then most of the time it just ends up being a stat stick that increases attack and then provides its base stats of crit. That's what it is most of the time. And in a lot of situations, Emerald of Genesis is just straight up better than Camellia's signature on most units. Surprising, I know, but it kind of just, it is what it is. I think the only characters where this is actually better than EOG is on a DPS Brant that's not building that much ER, and of course, Camellia herself. Next, let's get into probably, potentially, a better option than Emerald of Genesis, depending on the types of damage that Cartethyia is going to deal. We've got Blazing Brilliance over here, and I do believe that this is probably the best overall sword in the game for most of the cast. Emerald of Genesis, in my opinion, is either like a first, second, or third place option, and this is usually the first or second option for most units, because of the fact that A, most characters end up dealing resonance skill damage at some point throughout their kit. And with this weapon also giving a very, very impressive 48.6% crit, and also being the only sword in the game that gives crit, it's also got that 12% attack boost, and then a stacking buff that ends up becoming like 56% resonance skill damage that lasts up to 12 seconds when you fully stack it all up. Every character in the game can stack up this effect, but not every character in the game can benefit from the resonance skill damage bonus in the first place. Camellia being one of them, and Brant kind of like being the other, because they deal very low or little resonance skill damage. And so this weapon, if Cartethyia does end up having some decent motion values on a resonance skill and it isn't converted, like Camellia's resonance skill is converted to basic attack damage, this could also be a solid option as well. This also lets you, of course, reach the highest possible crit damage values in the game currently, but who knows? Cartethia's sword might also be critical damage as well when her signature comes out. I think it would probably be a good idea for her sword to be critical damage because, well, we don't have any other critical damage swords in the game. So it would be nice to see a bit more maybe of like a rounding out of the stat portfolio over there. So yeah. You can usually maintain very good uptime on this ability, and so its usefulness and how much better it is compared to EOG, if it even is better, will depend on how much resonance skill damage Cartethyia deals. So do keep that in mind. I would say overall, EOG is probably just going to serve you just fine, and in 99% of situations, because its effect is so general, most people will at minimum be able to get up one stack of this ability, and so you'll benefit from it in one way or another. And I don't think it's going to be like that much of an issue. I think she's just going to be, I think you should just wait on pulling her signature, see how she performs on EOG, and then from there, if you decide you want more damage or you just want, you know, the aesthetic, then you end up pulling it. But let's be honest over here. With how this thing looks like blue and gold, isn't it just going to match perfectly? Like, imagine her using this weapon. It's going to be like, it's going to fit her aesthetic perfectly. So, I mean, it's like, even if you're going from like the aesthetic angle, I mean, she's blue and gold. This thing's blue and gold. So I wouldn't freak out too much. Try her out on this weapon and then see where it goes from there. Oh, the last weapon is unflickering value. Just get the fuck right off this thing. Unless Cartethyia just ends up being like an ER skiller like Brant, I would just, no, don't even think about using this. This weapon is completely dog shit on every character that isn't Brant. Everybody knows it's not good. Don't even think about it. This weapon is for Brant and Brant only. Just don't grief yourself. All right, so that's going to be all of our different sword users. Now let's go ahead and get ourselves into the Broadblade menu. Make sure to remind me to switch off this so I don't end up pulling any of these weapons. Now let's switch off and go to the Broadblades so that we can talk a little bit more about Lupa and what weapons she might be very good with. So as we all know, she's going to be fusion and she's also going to be a Broadblade user. And based off the fact that, you know, we just look at some of the kits in the game, it's pretty clear that Chang Li, a character released in version 1.1 of the game, still does not have a recipient for her outro skill, which buffs fusion damage and resonance liberation damage. And so what this means is that a lot of people, let's be honest here, are pretty much in full belief that Lupa is going to be that mythical fusion liberation damage dealer. And so that's kind of like the tone that we're going to be going for in this in this preview, because it would just be such a massive fucking shame. It would be such a massive shame if Chang Li has to wait maybe another 2, 3, 4, 5 months just to have somebody that can fully leverage all of the different parts of this ability. Because I'm gonna be real here, she's waited long enough. It's almost going to be a year since her release. She was released in the second half of version 1.1. We're coming up onto 10 months, and she doesn't have anybody that actually uses this damn thing well. So with that in mind, as a hopefully liberation-based damage dealer that's also a Broadblade, we're going to explore the standard one. And you might be surprised at what this thing provides. I just talked about how all of the other standard weapons, right, aside from Emerald and Genesis and Static Mist, which provide that 24.3% crit, I just talked about how absolutely dookie dog water they are. However, if Lupa deals liberation damage, this thing might actually not be bad. It's not going to be good, but it might not be completely garbage. And the reason for that is it provides that same exact ER that same exact ER that we were just talking about, and ER is always good on a DPS character. I think the only DPS that doesn't really need ER that much is Jinxie, but she still likes it. And when you cast a Resonance skill, you'll increase your Resonance Liberation damage bonus by 7%, and that can stack up to 3 times. However, this also requires a kit to fully leverage its buff of 21%. This also requires a kit that can cast 3 Resonance skills within 12 seconds. And I'm not entirely sure if that's the sort of design that Kuro's gonna go for when it comes to Lupa. They might make her, you know, very similar to Calcharo, who can actually do that, cast those 3 Resonance skills. But if she can't, and she only has like 1 or 2 casts, she'll never actually be able to fully leverage this weapon. And this is what it looks like at R5. So the bonus goes the bonus doesn't even get up to like a standard 5-star weapon. Do keep in mind, guys, or sorry, a limited 5-star weapon. Do keep in mind when it comes to limited 5-star weapons, their bonuses start at 48% to a damage type. This thing, even at R5 with 5 dupes, right, it only goes up to 42. And every single signature weapon starts out at 48. And so, you know, at R5, I'm pretty sure this will be a fine option regardless, because, you know, 14% is still pretty decent, and 25.6% ER is also pretty good. It'll probably work better on Lupa, if she is Resonance Liberation damage dealer. It'll probably work better on her than it works on every other character, because let's just raise her, for pretty much every Broadblade user that isn't Calcharo, it kind of sucks. This thing kind of sucks on Gion. It kind of sucks on Jinxie. It sucks on Lumi. It sucks on Tauchi. It's just not really that good. And that's why nobody ever really recommends that you pull this one. And that you should instead just pull multiple copies of Emerald of Genesis and Static Mist instead. So, we've covered that standard weapon. You'll notice I don't have it on my account because I do think it's a little bit dog shit. So, now let's get into the other Broadblade options. And I've got quite a few. I've got, well, not really quite a few. I've got the only 2 that exist in the signature weapon category. I don't think that there's the third one. Lupa is going to be bringing the third. And so with that, let's just start off with Jinxie's. I kind of view Jinxie's signature as the, like, Emerald of Genesis of Broadblades. And the reason for that is that it gives a very, very nice 12% attribute damage bonus, which again, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a 12% attribute damage bonus, that's actually better than the 12% attack that we saw on weapons like Camellia's signature or weapons like, what's it called? Chang Li's signature. Because the 12% attribute damage bonus is essentially the same exact thing as having 12% damage in basic, heavy, liberation, and skill. It's like getting 12% rolls. It's like 4 echo rolls in 1 because it applies to all those different damage types. While a 12% attack, that's just equal to like a singular substat that you can roll on an echo. And so you can kind of view from a weapon's power budget, if it has 12% attribute damage bonus, that's kind of just better than 12% attack. That's actually why when you look at some weapons that have the 12% or that 12% attack, their weapon skills are typically actually stronger. Like Chang Li's, that goes up to 56% skill damage, while other weapons with the 12% attribute damage bonus, they only go up to like 48. So that's kind of like the trade-off over there. And so when it comes to all of these different signature Broadblades, the reason why I say Jinxie's is the Emerald of Genesis of the Broadblade class is because it buffs resident skill damage. And it's quite easy to actually activate it. All you need to do is intro skill, which grants the first half 24%, and then simply cast a resonance skill, which gives you the other 24% for a total of 48. Every single character in the game can activate its full effect and benefit from it as long as the resonance skill deals resonance skill damage. And so the only way that this thing is bad on Lupa and not good on her is if her resonance skill damage is converted to a different type. There are a lot of characters in the game that will fully convert a ability's damage type to a different one, like how Gion's Liberation is heavy attack damage, or how Camellia's skill is basic attack damage. And so, unless Lupa has a similar sort of dynamic in line with her resonance skill, this thing, she'll be able to at least get some sort of benefit from it. And it also comes with that very, very nice 24.3% crit rate, which is going to make your echo builds a lot easier. So, that's why I say this thing is probably the most general of all, because we haven't had a single Broadblade user that fully converts their resident skill damage into a different type. But if that is the case for Lupa, this thing is just going to be a 12% attribute damage bonus and then 24.3% crit rate stat stick for her. You might as well not have the weapon effect if that is the case. So do keep that in mind. The next 5-star limited weapon that we're going to be looking at over here is Verdant Summit. And boy, oh boy, this thing is kind of almost exactly the same as Jinxi's, except it focuses on mainly heavy attack damage. And I'm going to be real here. This thing, it's got nice stats. It's got the attribute damage bonus to 12%. It's also got the 48.6% crit damage. But chances are, this bonus over here of 24% heavy attack that stacks up to 2 times, it's probably not going to be very good on Lupa. Unless Lupa ends up putting or dealing some type of heavy attack damage, this weapon skill is probably going to have no effect. And with a lot of people, again, thinking that she's going to be a liberation-based damage dealer, I think that this is just going to end up being a stat stick, guys. I'm going to be real here. Verdant Summit is probably one of the most specific signatures in the game. Not because its effect is hard to activate, but because nobody fucking deals heavy attack damage. Jinxie uses them maybe one time in her kit when she's like ending her incarnation state and then she does her plunge. That's considered a heavy attack. Yeah, this weapon is kind of just only used for Jian. And when it comes to Lupa, I think it's going to be the same exact situation. So do keep that in mind. There's not a lot of great options in the Broadblade class, but Lupa might perform better on the standard Broadblade than you might think. So maybe it might be worth pulling that for, pulling that or just seeing what her performance is over there before going ahead and investing in her signature. But frankly, Broadblades are kind of like one of the more screwed classes from a general weapon perspective. So it might actually be worth, if you're looking for the most like efficient power to performance ratio, this might be my take. You might think about skipping Cartethyia signature. If you're pulling both units, you might think about skipping Cartethyia signature because A, she's going to be probably 1,000,000% just fine on EOG and you just use that on her. But you might want to actually pull Lupa's because she doesn't really have that many great options and there's a lot of potential for some of her actual options to kind of get screwed over. So I would say if you're like a low budget, maybe a mid-level spender, that's probably the route that I would take. If you're free to play, then, you could just use the standard weapon on both of them. But yeah, Lupa's crit ratios are going to suck if you use the standard weapon. And if you're a whale, you're just going to pull both. So why the hell does this part of the discussion even matter anyways? But yeah, I think that's going to be our full overview on all of those different weapon types, all of these different details when it comes to the reveal. So yeah, hopefully this overview was helpful and kind of painted a bit of a brighter, a bit of a more educated picture about how you want to spend your astrites, how you want to spend some of your forging tides. Because let's be honest here, ladies and gentlemen, with Kuro separating out forging tides from radiant tides, a lot of people have built up a lot of these over time. If you've been a day one player, I think with the shop resets and then the anniversary rewards as well that gave you 10, you kind of have, even if you're free to play, I think you literally have enough to just pull a weapon based off of all of like the rewards or based off of all of like the Coral Shop things. And so that alone should be enough, right? For you to decide when you want to do those expenditures. And I would say, if you want the bang for your buck, it might actually be Lupa. It might actually just be Lupa. And for her, you'll do just fine on EOG. So with that, let me know what you all think. Peace out.